Hello again and welcome to another Mordian Glory Warhammer 40k video. In today's episode we shall be doing another tournament after action report. That's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. And oh boy do I have a spicy meatball for your viewing pleasure today. Because you know what guys, it's been a long time. It's been a long time since I ran my preferred playstyle. Not since the beginning of the edition have I drowned the enemy, the opposing factions, in the tide of blood, balls, and bayonets. That's right, it's time for another pure infantry Imperial Guard tournament report. But this time there was a big twist. Because normally when I go pure infantry, I focus on the firepower, the special weapons, the plasma, the melter, the las cannons. But not this time. Oh, no siree. We were going to get up close and personal. We were going to make every Krieger's wet dream come true. We were going to get in there with the bayonet, with the shovel, and with the power fist. That's right, it wasn't just pure infantry guard, it was pure infantry melee guard, combat guard. Drive them, men, drive them. And let me tell you, it worked. No, it was not a meme. It was a dream. And so with the hype train leaving the station, let's not mess around any further. Let's fix bayonets and charge right into today's episode. As is tradition, I want to start off this video with a few thank yous. I want to say a big thank you to Just Play Games in Liverpool for hosting and organising this tournament. If you've watched any of my tournament reports, you've heard Just Play come up before. They are a fantastic, friendly local gaming store in Liverpool, and I highly recommend them. They've got a fully stocked gaming store. They've got lots of food and snacks on tap, so you can stay fully energized and hydrated whilst you're playing. And they organize regular 40k and other game systems tournaments every single month. Sometimes they do 2 tournaments a month. I just enjoy playing there, and there's a good reason why I do a lot of tournaments there. I also want to say a big thank you to all of the opponents that I played at this event. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for letting me bring another wacky skewed tournament army to your meta. And thank you to every single one of you guys for being absolute gents. Every single game was a pleasure to play, and that was in big part thanks to people who I played against. But with all of that said, now let's get into the video proper, and we'll start off with a brief list overview. As per usual, I have created a separate video which goes into the nitty gritty, the deep dive as it were, of the list and all the individual upgrades and units and tactics that have gone into the army. If you want to see that, there'll be a link down in the description below. But here are the cliff notes. I had a unit of 20 Castellans led by Colonel Ironhand Straken. I mean, if I'm gonna do a combat army, I gotta have old Ironhand in there. He's an absolute beast, and leading a unit of Castellans means that it gave me a big blob of infantry that could scout move and start getting into the fight quickly. I then had 2 blobs of combat Cadians, something which I've been theory crafting about for a little while now. Each one of these Cadian units were joined by a Cadian Castellan with a power fist, and then a Cadian command squad which had a power fist on the officer, and then another power fist on one of the guardsmen, and then there was a regimental standard, a medic, and a master vox in each unit. I also had, joining the command squad, an Ogren bodyguard. This Ogren bodyguard had a ripper gun and an Ooge knife. Quick side note, any of you guys that think I've made a mistake here and you can't have 3 leaders in a unit, you are right, you can't have 3 leaders in a unit, but the Ogren bodyguard isn't a leader. He is essentially, although he's got a separate data sheet, he is essentially an upgrade for the command squad. I then had 3 more combat blobs, this time Death Corps of Krieg. Each Krieg blob was 20 strong. There were 2 sergeants with power swords and plas pistols in there. And then we also had, joining the squad, a Death Corps Marshal, who of course is a power sword and plasma pistol. So we've got a lot of power sword attacks in here. In fact, we've got 8 between the sergeants and the commander. And then we also had a Tech Priest Enginseer join each unit. And then we had 4 servitors. And similar to the Ogre Bodyguard, yes, you can join servitors and a Tech Priest and another leader onto that single Krieg unit. Last but certainly not least, we had 2 more big blobs of infantry, but this time we went outside the Imperial Guard and we went to the Inquisition. I took 2 units of Inquisitorial henchmen and I fully maxed them out. Every Acolyte, every Gun Servitor, every Jacaro, every Mystic, the whole 9 yards, and I fully upgraded them with the Eviscerator guy, the Plasma Pistol, all that stuff. So 2 maxed out units with Demon Hosts, the whole 9 yards. And then leading one of those Inquisitorial blobs, I had Eisenhorn. He is just great. He's not bad in combat himself, and he also boosts the Demon Host as well, making that even more potent. And then in the other unit, I had Cotiers for some cheeky CP regeneration, and also because he's got a big Makov Thunderhammer. Overall, we had 8 big combat blobs of guard, every single one of them loaded up with some special weapons. All the special weapons were either plasma or melter guns, and with the Kriegers I also had grenade launchers in there. And then I also had lots and lots of close combat potential, with the Krieg blobs getting 16 various power attacks, and the same for the Cadian units as well. The general game plan was similar to that when I ran the 240 bug list. We were going to take fixed objectives, we were going to push forward, dominate on primary, and also dominate on secondaries. And unlike the bug army, we actually had damage output. Between our special weapons, we were able to soften the enemy up, or at least we were going to try to, and then finish them off with dozens of power fist attacks. But would this plan survive contact with the enemy? Well, you'll just have to wait a moment and find out, because before we get into the games, let's cover the lay of the land. So this tournament was a 1-day, 3-round RTT, and there were 24 players there. Overall, I would describe it as competitive. It wasn't a total Shark Tank, but neither was it a friendly or semi-competitive event. Most of the players there had good experience. There are a few regulars from the local meta, good players who come to these tournaments often, and they know the lay of the land, and they're pretty experienced at fighting on these tables with this terrain. In addition to that, there were some other outside players who clearly had been to a few tournaments before. In fact, I would say out of the 24 players, at most 2, at a push 3, it was their first tournament or their first taste of the competitive meta. The rest of them knew what they were doing. But at the end of the day, this is a local tournament. And so you tend to find that people have the best that they can bring from their collection, or they've read about a list online or a faction online and they've put their own twist on it just to take something that they prefer, or they're just running an army that they always run because that's just the faction they always run. But a lot of good experience here, many solid lists. As for the terrain, Just Play does their own thing. They don't use UKTC or WTC set terrain maps, but they do have their own terrain maps, which they have developed in-house. These terrain maps make sure that every player has at least 2 ruins in their deployment zone so that you can hide the majority of your army. They also ensure that there are at least 2 to 3 ruins in no man's land, and there are also forests and other bits which, even if they don't block line of sight, will give you the benefit of cover. Overall, I would say that the Just Play terrain does tend to favour shooting armies, although it's not impossible for combat armies to make a good dent there. But that covers all of the pre-game preamble, the preamble if you will. Now let's get to the real reason why you're all here. Let's dive right into game number 1. My first battle was to be against Morpheus and his Imperial Guard army. Now, Morpheus is a friend and a member of the channel, so big thank you to him for that. And we've actually played against each other before in another one of these Just Play tournaments. In that one, he had a super heavy and I was running a World War I artillery style army. But this time, he didn't have the super heavy, but he still had a lot of tanks and I had even more infantry. Overall, off the top of my head, his list included a Malcador, the new Solar Auxiliary one, looks really, really good. And there's also an old school Malcador Annihilator in there as well. We then had the Leman Russ Demolisher and a Leman Russ Eradicator, and there was a tank commander as well with a battle cannon. In addition to the tanks, there was a Basilisk, a Lord Solar Command Blob, a Creed Blob, and a big platoon of infantry as well. The mission for our game was Sites of Power, and I have to say this was a good mission for my army, considering every single one of my units contains several character models. The twist, the mission rule, was supply lines, meaning there was a chance to get some extra bonus CP, and the deployment was sweeping engagement. Speaking of deployment, I had a Inquisitor Blob and a Krieg Blob over on the right flank. I then had over on the left flank another Inquisitor Blob and the two other Krieg units. In the middle, I went for all of the Cadians and the Catachans. As for the vile traitor forces led by Morpheus, he had his Annihilator with an Armoured Fist Squad, I forgot to mention that in his list, over on the right flank. On his home objective, he had the Lord Solar Blob and a Basilisk. In the middle, he had the Tank Commander and also the Creed Blob. And then over on the left flank, we had the Demolisher as well as the big platoon of Guardsmen. And I think the Eradicator was also in the center. With both armies down on the table, it was time to find out who was going to go first. And we rolled off, and Morpheus did win the roll. So the Traitor Guard would be going first. And upon sighting the enemy, he advanced, sir. That's his style, sir. The Annihilator and the Iron Fist Squad came down towards the objective on the right-hand side. We had the Eradicator make a push to the center. And then over on the left, the Malcador, the Demolisher, and the Tank Commander started going for that objective over on the left-hand side. And that one was pretty exposed to their firepower as well. The guard shooting opened up and it did do a reasonable amount of damage. Now, the majority of the boom boom took place over on that left flank, and that is because the Eradicator and the Malcador Annihilator were both cleansing their respective objectives. But where the firepower did come in, it caused some heavy casualties. The Catachans, led by Straken, took the worst of it, and after the dust had settled, only Straken and 4 of his original troopers remained. There was also some firepower put into Cotiez's unit, although they managed to weather the storm relatively effectively because of the -1 to wound combined with their 5+ invulnerable save. But now it was time for the Emperor's true finest to go. It was my turn 1. And upon sighting the enemy, I advanced, sir. That is my style, sir. A general advance across the entire line was called. Over on the right flank, the Inquisition Blob moved forward and was able to get pretty close to the Annihilator and the Armoured Fist Squad. Behind them came the Kriegers. I ended up actually having most of the Kriegers behind the ruin, but I did poke one guy through the ruin so that I would be, one or two guys through the ruin, so I would be able to do some cleansing on that objective on the right hand side. In the center, I pushed forward with both of my Cadian units, and Straken's unit that was on the left sort of took shelter behind one of the mid-board L-shaped ruins, and Straken's unit did pass their battle shock test, so they were able to get within 6 inches of the center of the board and deploy the teleporter homer. Over on the left, I pushed forward with both Krieg units, giving each squad move, trying to support the Inquisition unit as they powered forward with Cotiez, and then it came over to my shooting. Now bear in mind that I didn't have a huge amount of shooting because on the right, my Krieg blob was cleansing. In the center, my Cadians were cleansing and Straken was deploying Teleporter Homer. And then over on the left, that's really where the firepower was happening. And it's interesting, that was for both sides. The left was where the damage was being done. Now, on that left-hand side, I unleashed my Melter Guns and my Demon Prince gaze menacingly at the Leman Rush Demolisher, but I didn't have a very good turn, and I only inflicted a handful of wounds onto the tank. It did pop smoke, which made a big difference. As for the right-hand side, the only unit that could shoot was my Inquisition blob, and they managed to scratch the paint of the Annihilator, but that was really it. Then it was time to get up close and personal, and I made some charge rolls. Firstly, the Inquisition blob led by Eisenhorn charged into the Annihilator, and they got a really long charge. They were able to make it to the Armored Fist Squad as well. They didn't actually declare the Armored Fist Squad, but what I did is I declared the Annihilator, base to base as many people as I could, and then because I had a lot of movement, I was able to start piling in and tagging the Chimera afterwards. And on the left-hand side, I made a long charge with the Inquisition unit into the Demolisher, and I also got a charge with the Krieg unit at the front as well. The Krieg unit was actually relatively easy because they had move, but the Inquisition unit actually failed their charge at first, but one CP reroll later, and I was able to get them in. This was to be the first test of the combat guard prowess. Will we destroy them with our bayonets, or will we bounce off? The end result was somewhat in the middle. On the left-hand side, between the Inquisition and Coach's Thunderhammer and all of the Servitors and the Tech Priests, we were actually able to bring the Leman Russ down to just 3 wounds. I was a little unlucky with my attacks, a lot of them going wide because I hadn't put fixed bayonets on the Krieg unit, and a lot of the Inquisition stuff hits on 4s naturally, so I actually missed with probably more attacks than I hit, but I was okay with grinding that down to 3 wounds. It was going to get to shoot me next turn because it is a Demolisher, but it's not like it's got out of the fight completely unscathed. Over on the right hand side, I actually did struggle to do much damage to the Annihilator at all, and it's got like 18 wounds, so it's pretty chunky. So after the shooting and the combat was done, I had reduced it down to about 10 wounds. But hey, I was happy with those results. At the end of the day, who knew you could get a turn 1 charge with guard? I'm telling you, this combat army, it's got a few tricks up its sleeve, and with move, you can get those charges in sooner than expected. And I certainly feel like I caught my opponent off guard with how aggressively I came towards him. I mean, at the end of the day, guard armies normally are known for being a little bit more passive, a little bit more shooty, but here I was just ramming my army down the throat of my opponent. Going into battle round 2, and the Traitor Guard were in a bit of a pickle. They only had their home objective, which just gave them 3 on primary. And then when it came over to secondaries, they got no prisoners and assassination. Now, a lot of my blobs are now out in the open, but also a lot of them are tying enemy units up in combat, and at the same time are also quite durable. In fact, the only blob that's really easy pickings for that is the Catachan unit, which is hiding in the center. Then they also got Assassination, which is again great for this list, but not on turn 2. You really want to draw Assassination like turn 3 or turn 4 when you're fighting this army, when a lot of the blobs have been thinned down. Movement was fairly limited for Morpheus this turn. He just brought his infantry blob out from behind the left-hand ruin and started putting it onto the objective over there, hoping to blow me away and start taking that objective. Then we get on to the shooting. On the right hand side, the Annihilator fires pretty much all of its guns out of combat into the Krieg blob behind the Inquisition and manages to actually wipe out about half of the unit. It was a good blast, to say the least, from the Demolisher cannon. And then we also had the sort of Stubber and the Las cannons and the Chimera, and they all fired into the Inquisition unit. But again, that -1 to wound combined with the 5% vulnerable save meant that I only took maybe 3 dead acolytes from all the remaining firepower. In the center, the Eradicator opened fire with a point-blank volley, and thanks to the fact that it's got 6 plus D3 shots and that my Cadian blobs were giving +5 for blast, because there's 20 plus a command squad plus other guys in there, meant that one of my Cadian units essentially got cut down to just a handful of the original blob, and the command elements desperately clinging onto them. But over on the left hand side is where the pain train was being delivered. The Demolisher fired into the Inquisition unit because Morpheus rightly assumed that I couldn't reinforcement those. And so that was chopped down by about half. Even with the -1 to wound, the Demolisher would take aim, not suffering any issues by being stuck in combat, had a bit of a field day. Then the Malcador and the Tank Commander went into the rearward Krieg blob and was able to cut that down by about half as well. So I took some big chunks. Some big chunks were taken out of my blobs, I should say. But it wasn't all good for the Traitor Guard, because in the combat step, I was able to destroy the Demolisher with my remaining Inquisition units and also with the Servitors from the Krieg blob. That freed up both those units, ready to start running rampant in my turn 2. And over on the right hand side, I was able to take the Annihilator down from 10 wounds to 6 wounds in combat. So that's starting to be on its last legs. But then it comes over to my turn 2, and it's a big one. Firstly, I'm able to score hugely this round. I get 15 for primary because I'm on all the objectives but my opponent's home one, and I've got characters on all the middle ones as well. I'm then able to cleanse, and I do this over on the middle and on the left hand side. And finally, I'm able to deploy Teleporter Homer in the middle as well, because even though the Catachans had died to my opponent's Basilisk, Straken had survived. But what really sealed the deal here was my charges and my shooting. Firstly, over on the right, the Krieg blob gets into combat with the Annihilator and ironically annihilates it. The power fists from the Servitors hit good, they managed to get a few wounds through, and Morpheus fails both of his saves, and they're 3 damage each, those power fists, because they're the Servitor ones, they're the servo arms. So the Annihilator goes down. This also results in the Chimera, which was still in combat with the Inquisition blob, taking a whole bunch of wounds as that entire blob just swings over to that thing now. In the center, I almost destroy the Eradicator. Between all of the shooting from the fresh Cadian blob that's marching up and the fact that it charges in, I'm able to reduce it down to a handful of wounds. I think it was on like 2, maybe 3 wounds left, but I know that it's not going to survive the end of turn 3. And then over on the left, my Inquisition blob is the one that actually cleansed the left-hand objective over there. And what I do is all my 2 Krieg units, they both get 3 people back into their blobs, and I unleash a lot of firepower into the enemy infantry platoon that had come forward, and I actually kill them down to just a handful of survivors, and I don't charge it and finish it off because I don't want my opponent to get reinforcements. What I actually do is I do move on the Krieg blob that had destroyed the Demolisher, and I'm able to get a long bomb charge into Reed's mortar squad. So now I'm threatening my opponent's backfield, and I don't quite wipe out Krieg units. I don't get a huge charge. I get just enough so that I get a few in, but I am able to tie that unit up and also basically kill all but 2 or 3 of the guardsmen, and Creed is now in hot water. The big problem for my opponent was going into turn 3, pretty much everything he had was either damaged or destroyed. On the right hand side, he's got a battered Chimera and Armored Fist squad. In the center, he's got a degraded Eradicator. And over on the left, his Creed unit has been tied up, and also his Demolisher is destroyed. His infantry blob is down, basically. And he's got a Malcador, which has been tagged in combat. It got tagged because I piled into it with the Inquisition blob when the Demolisher died. And I've just been grinding it down with a few attacks from like Cotiers and the Demon Host. On top of this, the primary situation is not good for my opponent. He's only got his home objective. He does do well on the secondaries, managing to get Assassination, with for Straken using his Basilisk, and he gets engaged on all fronts using his Kazakin coming in from Strategic Reserve. But the damage output is much reduced this time, and the only damage that happens is the Krieg blob on the left, which had powered into his Creed command unit, takes a pasting from the engaged Malcador and the tank commander, but that's it. And so it comes over to my turn 3, and I am maxing out Sites of Power again. I'm getting Cleanse again. I'm deploying Teleporter again. And so essentially what happens over turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. On the right-hand side, I kill the Chimera, I kill the Armor Fist Squad that gets out of the Chimera, and then I actually get into combat with his Lord Solar Eisenhorn unit, gets there on my turn 4, charges in, and over a couple of rounds of combats, basically they fight each other to annihilation with, I think, just the Lord Solar and a handful of Platoon Command Squad survivors fighting against Eisenhorn, the Demon Host, and just 2 Acolytes. And then in the middle, I take out the Eradicator in my opponent's turn 3, and then my turn 4 and turn 5 I get the Creed unit. I also get the Malcador as well, and the tank commander ends up surviving on 1 or 2 wounds. And on the left, well, the center and the left, basically that's the same thing there, because the center units came round and supported the left hand flank. On the left, the only thing of note was I wiped the Kazakin out, and I wiped the platoon out on the left hand side in one go, so only one of those could be reinforcemented, and that was really it. But we get to the end of the game, and I am comfortably sat on all of the middle objectives pretty much the whole game. I have cleansed 2 objectives every time, and I have deployed Teleporter Homer in the middle every single time. And so, and for my opponent, round 4, they had Defend Stronghold, and they get their home objective. Round 5, they have their home objective, and they're able to use a reinforcing unit to get deployed Teleporter Homer. But the end result is very much in favor of the combat guard of my army, and the final points was 95 to me and 45 points to Morpheus. And the big thing that I noticed from this game, in comparison to when I'd run the Tyranids, is the final state of the battlefield was very much in favour of the melee guard. Unlike with the Nids, where we'd surge forward for 3 turns, tied the enemy up, and then basically been tabled, this time we were comfortably sat on all of the objectives. Our army was battered, but mostly intact, in comparison to the Traitor Guard, who had a Basilisk, a very badly damaged tank commander, and the shattered remnants of a Supreme Command blob left over. But with 1 victory under my belt, it was time to go straight into game number 2. And I played against Alex and his Ultramarines. Now, I've actually played against Alex before at Just Play in one of these tournament after action reports. And he normally runs Space Wolves, and he loves his Thunderwolf Cavalry in his Stormlance attachment, running forward, advancing and charging, all of that good stuff. But he's recently put together a Ultramarine army because he wanted to try something a little bit different, and so he had an Ironstorm Spearhead with all of the trimmings. In his army list, he had 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts with plasma cannons and also heavy flamers. He then had 2 of the Storm Speeders, the anti-tank ones, and there was a Gladiator Lancer, a Predator with the turret autocannon and Sponson las cannons, and then we had a Storm Raven gunship with the multi-melter, twin assault cannon, and lots of hurricane bolters. And finally, there was Bobby G himself, the Primarch of the Ultramarines. Quick side note here. In a funny sort of way, this list was very similar to the one that I faced in my round 1. Lots and lots of firepower with a big lean into vehicles. But the significant difference here was that my opponent had Dreadnoughts and would be much less susceptible to being tied up in combat, because he can just punch his way out with those big stompy boys. But with all that said, let's get back to the game, and we have got for the primary objective, Vital Ground. The mission twist was Minefield, and I can confidently tell you now that Alex and I both forgot it. It never came up in the game. And then for deployment, we had good old-fashioned Dawn of War. Speaking of deployment, I had an Inquisition blob on the right hand side with a unit of Kriegers. This time I mixed up and I had the Kriegers at the front and the Inquisition more towards the back. In the center, I had the Straken unit hiding in a ruin, and then over on the left hand side, I had an Inquisition blob and I had my 2 other units of Kriegers. I did put 2 blobs in reserve. I put all of my Cadians in reserve because I took one look at this battlefield and went, there's no way I can hide everything, and my opponent is definitely going to get some early shots in if he goes first. As for the Ultramarine deployment, over on the left flank, they had a Redemptor Dreadnought and a Gladiator Lancer. In the center left, they had another Redemptor Dreadnought and one of the Storm Speeders. Over on the center right, they had a Redemptor and their Predator. And then on the extreme right flank, they had the second speeder, the Storm Raven, which they deployed in hover mode. And then they had Bobby G. My opponent took tactical objectives, and like every game, I took Deploy, Teleport to Homer, and Cleanse as fixed objectives. With all of the units down and secondaries picked, it was time to go and find out who was going to get the first turn. And as is tradition, I lost the roll-off. I'd been on a bit of a streak of going first. It happened around Adepticon. Ever since Adepticon, I have returned to my normal ways of just going second. I now just deploy as if I'm going to go second. I just presume that it's normal, that I always go second. It is the natural state of affairs. Apparently, Skinwalker Mordian is no more, and he has gone on holiday. Ultramarine turn 1 was fast and furious. On the left, the Redemptor strode forward and was able to get line of sight with its plasma cannon onto the Catachans that were hiding in the center. I told you these maps were surprisingly open, and thanks to Blast, did inflict a significant number of casualties on Straken's unit. Straken's unit always getting the crap beaten out of it in this tournament. And then we had the Lancer put and another Dreadnought, put a whole bunch of firepower into my Inquisition blob, and it kind of just tanked it. It just with the -1 to wound and the 5 invincible save, I think I lost like 2 acolytes to essentially a gladiator. It only had the big gun in range, to be fair, and the big gun from the Dreadnought. But yeah, I didn't lose very much. I rolled like a fiend on the 5-ups. Alex definitely got punished by the -1 to wound. As for the rest of the Ultramarine army, there really wasn't a lot for it to see, so it just moved forward in a general advance. Turn 1 for the Imperial Guard was incredibly quick. I moved forward the Krieg blob on the right with move, and I cleansed that objective. I moved forward one of the Krieg blobs on the left with move, and I cleansed that objective. Draken's unit moves out into the center and is able to, with move, get deployed teleport to Homer. And my Inquisition blob moved forward a bit to get near the left-hand objective, but that was it. Same on the right-hand side as well. Firepower was almost non-existent. I can't remember if I did any damage. Maybe one of the demon hosts had a tickle. That was about it. So a relatively slow start to the game. That was not to last. The Ultramarines decided to choose violence, and turn 2, they went balls deep. Firstly, on the left-hand side, we had the 2 Redemptors and the Gladiator fire a ton of firepower, and then the Dreadnoughts charged in to the Krieg blob holding the objective, and they were wiped out to just the Tech Priest and the Death Corps Marshal. I couldn't even use reinforcements on this unit because they had been wiped out in combat, and I'd already used reinforcements and the CP that I had available to do reinforcements on the Catachan unit in the center, which ended up getting destroyed in the shooting phase from the Land Speeder Storm and also the Storm Raven. And then over on the right hand side, I lost another Krieg blob to Bobby G in combat, who had been had some fire support from the Redemptor, so a little bit of firepower from the Storm Raven, and also another one of the Storm Speeders and the Predator. So I lost 3 blobs in one turn, and the one blob that I brought back was the Catachan unit, which is arguably like the worst blob in my army. Now that was a really big blow, a potentially game-winning blow. My opponent had wiped out 3 blobs in one turn, 2 of them permanently. But you know what they say, the guard gets hit hard, but we hit back even harder. And I needed that mantra to be true. I needed a big turn 2 if I was to stay in this thing. In my movement phase, I push forward with my Inquisition blob over on the right-hand objective, and I also push forward with my Inquisition blob and the second Krieg unit, the one that I've been hiding in the ruin, on the left-hand side. I bring my Catachans back, and I bring them just onto the home objective to lock that down, and I also bring in my 2 units of reserves. I bring a Cadian blob over on the left flank, and a Cadian blob over on the right flank. Everyone gets take aim because I need to do damage. Over on the right hand side, the Cadian blob just blows up the Storm Speeder, a couple of cheeky melter guns getting the damage done. The Inquisition unit goes for cleanse on the objective. I think about going after the Storm Raven, but I'm like, it's basically a flying Redemptor, it reduces damage and everything, and I could shoot it and I could charge it, but points mean prizes, and my plan is to have the Inquisition blob just lean into its durability so that I can just keep scoring points in the center. The main show, though, was over on the left. That's where I needed to do the big bucks. I start off by unleashing all of my firepower. I have got my Krieg blob, I have got my Cadian blob, and I've also got my Inquisition blob, and I put all that firepower into the 2 Redemptors. Now, one of the Redemptors had actually taken some damage already. I had tickled it with my Inquisition blob turn 1, and I'd also managed to do a surprising few wounds to it with my Tech Priest and my Deathcore Marshal when it charged me in its turn 2. So I finished that one off in shooting, and I'm like, oh, I've still got like a Krieg blob left over. I might as well put that into the second Dreadnought. And it goes off. The melter guns hit, both melter guns wound, I get the damage through. The plasma guns start going off. I even use a CP for the grenade stratagem, and so I'm able to bring that second Dreadnought down to just like maybe 4 wounds by the time all the shooting and the stratagems have been used, and I charge it with both my Inquisition blob and with the Krieg unit, and I'm able to bring it down, netting myself both Dreadnoughts on the left flank, and really that's what kept me in the game. That broke my opponent's stranglehold over me. If I'd got one of those Dreadnoughts, it would have been okay. Getting both of them really secured that flank for me. And thanks to the way that I was able to get my charges off, I was able to actually get some extra, some pretty good movement up the board as well, going into being able to threaten my opponent in my turn 3, start getting into those back lines. I should just mention, in case anyone is curious, I was able to cleanse the left-hand objective as well, because I did have my 2 characters left over from the Krieg blob, the first one, and so they were the ones that essentially cleansed that objective for the rest of the game. Going into turn 3, and the Ultramarines turn up the heat. Starting off on the right-hand side, Storm Raven falls back. I forgot to mention I did get a 9-inch charge off with my Cadian blob. So it falls back, so its firepower is out of the game there. But Bobby G, the Dreadnought, and the Predator go into that Cadian blob and essentially wipe them out. There's a few survivors, but by and large, that unit is made combat ineffective. On the middle, the Storm Speeder that was hanging around those parts actually flies forward and charges into my Catachans on the home objective, just locking them down. I'm actually okay with that. I will have that OC, I'll have that objective, so that's not an issue. On the left-hand side, the Marines are actually struggling. The only thing they've got over there is a Gladiator Lancer, and my opponent at this point draws Investigate Signals, and the Lancer is the only unit that has the capability to get it. So it just falls back a little bit, or moves back a little bit, I should say, and investigates the signal. That gives me a bit of breathing room on that left side. Overall, I had definitely noticed that the Marine firepower had tapered off. It had petered out in turn 3, and I felt like the momentum of the game was swinging in my favor. And so I pushed hard. The Krieg unit on the left-hand side with Move was actually able to deploy Teleporter Homer in my opponent's deployment zone. And then the Cadian unit and the Inquisition unit, between the firepower of the Cadians and the firepower of the Inquisition and the charge of the Inquisition, did get the Gladiator Lancer, essentially clearing the left flank of all hostiles. And it was Cotiers who went in with his big Thunderhammer and took the last 3 wounds off that Lancer. The right hand side was much dicier, but the name of the game there was just a delaying action. Just slow the enemy down and deny them points. I took my Inquisition blob led by Eisenhorn and I moved it and charged it onto the Dreadnought, allowing me to hold the objective and also tying it up. Now, it was a big risk going after the Dreadnought, because obviously it can hurt me in combat, but I figured that I've got my 5-up Invuln, and I'd rather that it put my opponent in a difficult situation where it's like, do I fall back with the Dreadnought and allow like the Storm Raven and Bobby G to open up, or do I stay in combat and therefore reduce their firepower? In the end, my opponent did fall back with the Dreadnought, which meant that was another turn where I didn't have to worry about a bit of my opponent's firepower. Another indirect way I'd have taken a unit out of the game for a turn. And by the end of battle round 3, the points started to swing in my favour. I had consistently been on more primary than my opponent, being able to hold my home objective as well as one in the middle, and I've been able to get more secondaries. My secondaries weren't quite as strong as last game. I had missed teleporter home at turn 2, and I was able to only cleanse one objective turn 3, but I was still doing pretty well on the points. Turn 4 comes around, and the Ultramarines go for one last big push. Like I said, they fell back to Redemptor, and they used the Storm Raven and the Predator and Bobby G to clear out the Inquisition blob. They do manage to secure the right flank by the end of their turn 4. But that's really all that they have to report from their turn. In terms of the secondaries, they were able to secure no man's land, and they held one objective in the center, on the right hand side I should say, and then they stormed hostile objective by taking that right hand objective off my Inquisition blob. But that was it. Their whole turn was just killing that one unit, and because of how durable it was, it took every scrap of firepower they had left to bring it down. And again, it came down to Bobby G finishing it off in combat. But unfortunately for the Marines, it was too little too late. Whilst their attention had been focused on just securing the no man's land on the right flank, the Guard were pouring through on their shattered left flank. I used my Krieg blob and some long-range plasma shots from the Cadians to severely damage the Predator that was holding my opponent's home objective, and then I charged in and finished it off, securing my opponent's home field. This meant that the only units my opponent had left over were one Storm Raven, one Speeder, and one Redemptor. That was it, and all of that was basically on the right-hand side. When it came to my opponent's turn, he got no primary for his home objective. He only got the primary for the middle objective, and his secondaries were engage North Fronts and cleanse. He was able to cleanse the one objective, and he was able to engage for 3, but that was about it. When it comes over to my turn 5, not only do I hold my home objective, not only do I hold one of the ones in no man's land, but I'm also on his objective, and then I'm able to get some cleansing and do some deploying teleporter home as well, and that gives me a really big boost at the end of the game. And so once the dust has settled and we get to the end of turn 4, turn 5, the final points are 46 points to the Marines. They really struggled on primary. They only got 11 primary over the course of the game, and it was 70 points to his Imperial Guard, with us doing respectably on both secondaries and it really being the primary where we had a big lead. I think the main lesson learned from that game is that Marine Ironstorm has a blistering amount of firepower, but every single one of those units you take out, you do see a noticeable drop. And I think it wins in a direct firefight, and I think it wins in a game of knockout, but I'm not sure that it's very good for attritional style warfare, which I guess kind of makes sense for Marines. But with another enemy gun line successfully charged down and power fisted back into oblivion, it was time to go into game number 3, and quite possibly the hardest matchup of the entire tournament. So game 3 rolls around and I am playing against Jack and his Death Guard. I'd actually played against Jack before one of these tournaments when he was using his World Eaters. So this dude is a heretic through and through all of the Chaos armies. Now in his list, he had Mortarion and 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, a classic 10th edition Death Guard combo. There was also a Chaos Predator, as always, the autocannon one with the las cannons on the sponsons, and then there were 2 units of Death Shroud Terminators. One big unit led by a Lord of Virulence, and one smaller unit led by Typhus. Finally, there was a Rhino, which had 10 Plague Marines inside with a couple of accompanying characters. The mission for this scenario was going to be the Ritual, one that I traditionally have struggled with. For the twist, it was Scrambler Fields. This was a big deal. It meant no scouting, and most importantly, you couldn't deep strike onto objectives. This meant that not all of the Death Shroud Terminators went into reserve, and especially considering that I had 2 Inquisitor blobs with Mystics, Deep Strike was not going to be a good option for these Death Guard. Finally, the deployment was Search and Destroy, aka Table Quarters. Speaking of deployment, pretty much everyone put everything on the board. The only unit that went in reserve for Jack was a unit of Death Shroud with Typhus. For my deployment, I had all of my Kriegers and the Catschans, because they couldn't scout, in my central big ruin out of line of sight. On my right flank, I had both of my Cadian blobs and an Inquisition blob, and on the left side, towards the center of the map, I had an Inquisition blob. I had my Inquisition units essentially trying to make these huge, big anti-deep strike bubbles to force Typhus to go somewhere he didn't really want to go. As for the Death Guard, the big unit of Death Shroud went bang in the center on the front line of the deployment zone, and then over on the right-hand side, he had his Predator, and over on the left, he had the Plague Train, the Plague Burst Crawlers, and Mortarion. Naturally, I take fixed objectives. My plan is to essentially poop out 2 objectives in no man's land, but very near my deployment zone, and cleanse those, and then just pour guardsmen into the center of the map and get teleport to Homer as much as possible. And if my opponent ends up pushing forward aggressively and leaving a gap, I'm going to start trying to use reinforcements to get a teleport to Homer into his backfield as well. Jack decides to go for tactical objectives, and then we roll off for first turn, and I get the hat trick of not going first, and we go straight into Death Guard turn 1. Turn 1 for the Death Guard was actually very active. The Death Shroud move towards the center of the map, and they get quite a few models with line of sight onto that middle objective. So if I decide to move on there, they are going to squirt all over me with their hand flamers, their plague wrists. A unit of cultists poops out an objective via the Ritual, and then we get over to the main event, which is the Plague Burst Crawlers. And then we get over to the shooting, and the Lord of Virulence had actually been able to see one of my Cadian units. I couldn't quite hide them all. When you've got so many models, sometimes not everything can be tucked away out of line of sight. And so the bombardment really hit them hard, and my Cadian blob ends up getting wiped down to essentially a handful of the regular troopers, which are managing to keep the whole blob together. There was also some scattered shooting from the direct fire weapons on the Plague Burst Crawlers as well, who had been able to move around and start seeing some line of sight onto the edge of the Inquisition blob, stuff like that. And the Predator also was able to come down the right flank and get some long range shots here and there as well. Overall, I take about 25 to 30 casualties on the first turn, but none of my units are completely wiped out. And that's a really good thing because I only have the 1 CP, so I can't use reinforcements. It comes over to my turn 1, and it's incredibly simple. I can tell the Death Guard have got a lot of firepower, and so my plan here is to just get as many points in the bank as possible. So I push forward my Inquisition unit, the one led by Eisenhorn, and they deploy Teleporter Homer in the center of the board. I then push forward one of my Krieg units using move, and I'm able to get onto the central objective and cleanse that one. I also use my other Inquisition unit to poop out an objective near my deployment zone. And that really is my turn. I don't think I fire a single shot in anger this turn. I just push forward with a lot of my infantry and, like I said, do my secondaries. Death Guard turn 2 comes along, and it's another big one. Firstly, on the left-hand flank, Typhus comes down and he targets the Straken blob. Now, he was out of range of any objective, so Scrambler Fields wasn't affecting him, and he was out of range of my Mystics. And then he unleashes all of the Hand Flamers and the Destroyer Hive from Typhus, and he rolls real hot. I think he dropped maybe 3 shots in total from the 4 flamers that the Death Shroud have got, and then Typhus gets like the max on his Destroyer Hive as well. And so Straken's unit is essentially reduced to a puddle of green goo. F in the chat for Straken. I don't think he actually killed anything this tournament. It was really sad. I can't remember if he got anything in the first game. Yeah, Straken had a bad one this tournament. And so for the 3rd time in a row, I think it's because Straken's got a reputation at Just Play Now. Enough people have been on the receiving end of Straken's Devil Claw Bionic Arm that every single time that they see him on the board now, he's the first thing to go. He was literally the first unit wiped out in pretty much every single game. And so Straken survives, but his blob goes, and I use reinforcements to bring the Kachans back. In the center, the Death Shroud make themselves known. They move forward and they put all of their firepower into one of the infantry blobs. I think it was the 2nd Cadian unit that was behind the Kriegers that were on the objective. Now, Jack doesn't roll quite as hot this time. It does balance out. And so I lose a bunch of infantry, but most of the special weapons stay intact, and that's the important bit. He then charges into the Kriegers that are in the center, and he almost wipes them out, but not quite. Between the fact that I had a CP, which I'd used for take cover on that unit with Inspired Command, and the fact that I've got a 5-up Feel No Pain, and the fact that the servitors in there have actually got a 4-up save, which goes to a 3-up save with take cover, it meant that I was able to tank most of the damage, and I survived the ordeal with about 4 of the Krieg infantry left. It might have been, I think it was 4 models in total, actually. I think it was the medic, 1 dude, and the characters, and that was it. The Plague Train goes as well, but it spreads its firepower a lot more this turn. First off, what little direct firepower there was goes into the Kachans. That's actually what finishes them off. Typhus had got them down to like 4 dudes, and then between the entropy cannon and 2 or 3 sluggers, the rest of the Kachans went down. The bombardment helps go into the Cadians that the Death Shroud had been flaming, and also actually goes into the Cotiers Inquisitorial blob as well. But casualties are fairly limited from the mortars this time. The blast isn't as high, especially with the Inquisition and with the damaged Cadian unit, but it's a lot of dice that are being rolled, and there's still significant casualties that are being inflicted. And I would say overall this turn, I lose 20 Katachans, and then I lose probably 3 or 4 from the Inquisition, and then I probably lose about 15 of the Cadians or so. So still probably about 40 casualties inflicted. Jack is really hitting my army hard, and he's clearing those blobs and he's shattering those blobs fairly quickly. Couple of additional points from Death Guard turn 2. Jack's cultists pooped out another objective with the ritual, and the Plague Marines moved towards the center in their Rhino as a second wave to follow up the Death Shroud. Coming over to my turn 2, and it's another quick one for me. I only have 2 goals this turn: poop out another objective and deal with those Death Shroud. And that's exactly what I do. I poop out another objective, so it's just outside my deployment zone, but still far enough away from the other objectives. And I just dogpile so many infantry forward. Every Krieger, every Cadian, the Kachans come on from reinforcements. They can't get towards center this turn, but they can set up to be another wave. And the Inquisition blobs go forward as well. I also unleash a ton of firepower into the Death Shroud and pretty much wipe them out. Considering it's a big unit and it's got Cloud of Flies on it, the Cadian squads actually came in handy here thanks to their Cadia Stands ability, meaning they can ignore modifiers and whatnot. And so I end up charging the Death Shroud with the Eisenhorn Inquisition Blob, and I wipe them out to just the Lord of Virulence. But once again, I have been able to achieve my objectives. I am able to deploy Teleporter Homer in the center of the board, and I'm also able to cleanse one of my objectives as well. So Death Guard round 3 rolls around, and the TO comes up to us and says, just to let you guys know, there's 20 minutes left on the round. And it's like, wow, it has taken us a long time to get to this point. So the turn 3 for the Death Guard sees them going balls to the wall, all in, everything they've got, they are warming it all up. Mortarion goes in and manages to finish off one of the Krieg units. The Plague Burst Crawlers come round, unleash their firepower and their bombardment, and are able to wipe out a squad as well. The Plague Marines come in and completely butcher Eisenhorn's Inquisition unit. There's just a lot of firepower being slung down range, and there's a lot of dice being rolled, and by the time that the smoke has cleared and the dust has settled, a lot of my infantry has gone down. I've probably lost about 3 blobs, and I've been able to reinforce one of them, and I've lost an Inquisition blob as well. But the important thing is that I have been able to maintain control of 2 of the primary objectives just through the sheer amount of OC that I had dogpiled onto those things. It comes over to my turn 3. I've literally got a minute on the clock, and so I'm like, hold 2 objectives, cleanse objectives, deploy Teleporter Homer, done. 30-second turn, I don't even fire a single shot in anger, and then that's when the TO says, right, hard dice down, the game ends where it is. So the final score ended up being 45 to the Death Guard, and it was 40 points to the Imperial Guard. Now, normally that would be a win for Jack, but because of the fact that Just Play uses WTC scoring, and so you have to be more than 5 points ahead of your opponent, this actually ended up being a draw. However, I am under no illusions that if this game had gone on, I think Jack would have won it. I had done very little damage to his army. The only thing I'd been able to do is basically kill 1 unit of Death Shroud, and he had the Plague Marines, which, as we all know, are the real heavy hitters of the Death Guard coming in, and he also had all of his other firepower intact. I think turn 4, turn 5 sees the Guard getting severely pushed back, maybe even just driven to their home objective. And I know that it's not ideal, a game ending on turn 3 as well. It feels a little bit anticlimactic, but there was a really important observation that I drew from this game, which was, if you look at the turns, I had basically 1 quick turn 1, 1 very quick turn 3, and a fairly quick turn 2 as well. But the Death Guard turns, in terms of pure time, did take a lot more. Now, I want to make something abundantly clear here. Jack did not slow play. There was no funny business at all. We've played against each other before. We're good friends. There's no issues there whatsoever. But this is a phenomena which I have noticed occur before when I've used Pure Infantry Guard. People assume that it's going to be the Horde army that uses up a lot of the time, but it's actually not. More often than not, I have found that it's my opponent's turns take longer than mine. And that's because when you're playing into Pure Infantry Guard, you feel like you have to use every shot because you've got to clear through those blobs really quickly. It's not like when you're playing against a mixed army or a heavy tank army where you're like, well, there's no point in me firing those bolters that won't do any shots, so I won't bother doing them because it's just a waste of time. When you're playing against Guard, not only do you feel like all those shots are worthwhile because they can actually kill things, but also you feel like you need to use them because you've got to get those casualties in quickly, otherwise the Guard numbers are going to overwhelm you. As a result, what ends up happening is the opponent's turns take longer than the Guard turns, but it doesn't feel like the opponent is taking the piss. This is one thing that I think is really important, like an extra layer of nuance to this. If we were to look at just my turns versus Jack turns, it would look like Jack could use more time. But considering that at least half of his turn was me rolling saves, it kind of creates an interesting situation. Because if we were on a chess clock and we just did it by Jack's turns, my turns, the Jack probably would have timed out. But if we did it on who's rolling dice when, which some people do use chess clocks for, the time would have been perfectly equal. Because yes, his turns would have taken longer, but a lot of that time is me rolling my armor save, followed by my feel no pain, then choosing which casualties to remove. And so even though this game ended on turn 3, I think what we saw was an army that generates a lot of dice and has a lot of damage output and has a lot of firepower, rolling all of those dice. And then on the flip side, we saw an army which has a lot of saves, rolling a lot of dice as well. So I think the time was equally used between these two armies. I think this is just a case of the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. And in a funny sort of way, and some of you might think I've been huffing the copium here, but in a funny sort of way, I feel like this game was actually quite thematic and quite narrative. The Guard were throwing waves after waves of infantry forward, desperately trying to hold back the encroaching heretic Astartes, gathering as much information, deploying all the teleport homers, just doing what they could to achieve their objectives, regardless of the casualties. And sure, the Death Guard would have come in and killed everyone, but the Guard were able to hold the line. And truly, isn't that how the Guard win at the end of the day? They win by holding the line. And if there is one quote which I think can sum up this entire game, it's from General Sturm in Dawn of War, Winter Assault. To each of us falls a task, and all that the Emperor demands is that we hold the line and we die standing. It's what we do best. We die standing. And so with the end of Game 3 comes the end of the tournament. And the Pure Infantry Combat Guard had managed to go technically undefeated with 2 wins and a draw. And this meant that we ended up podiuming and coming 3rd overall at the tournament. I have to say, I really enjoyed using this style of guard. Not only was it pure infantry, which is my favorite way of playing, but it was a different twist, one that I'd not actually done before. It's something I've always wanted to try out, the ultimate bayonet charge. And I think it was successful overall. In 2 out of 3 games, we were able to literally charge down enemy gun lines. And unlike the Tyranids, we actually had the damage once we got there. I think that's the big difference between pure infantry, pressure guard, and I think this is like a guard pressure list, not often something you hear said, but I think the difference between like this kind of pressure army and let's say like another pressure army like pressure orcs or pressure nids, especially with unending swarm, is I found that not only did I tie my opponent up, not only did I keep my opponent distracted, not only did I dominate on primary, but I actually had damage output. My Tyranids truly did no damage at the last tournament, but my guard, with their power weapons and their melter guns and their plasma guns, actually were not only dominating on primary, were not able to play the fixed objectives really well, but they also were actually able to do damage in the majority of the games. And I think it's this which makes Combat Guard a genuinely competitive option. Is it S tier? Is it going to be winning grand tournaments and winning super majors? Probably not. But it's powerful enough that I think if you get practice with it and you sort of get familiar with it and you get good with it, that it can go into local events and come out overall with a positive win-loss ratio. Well, at least that's what I think. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. What would you change about this army? And how would you tweak it to get the most out of those combat units? Or would you swap some of the combat out, instead add some firepower back in there? As always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to power fist that like button and subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure, and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and Patreons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.